You'll never be anything more than an embarrassment to this family." My sister Victoria's words still echo in my mind as I stand in the grand ballroom of Moonrise Manor, watching the chaos unfold before me. 50 wedding vendors scrambling to pack up thousands of dollars worth of decorations, a celebrity wedding planner screaming into her phone about breach of contract, and 200 confused guests milling around the parking lot with nowhere to go. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The irony of standing in this exact spot where Victoria had planned to say her vows to tech mogul Brandon Whitmore wasn't lost on me. Just 48 hours ago, she had looked me dead in the eyes and told me I wasn't welcome at her wedding because my presence would somehow taint her perfect day. What she didn't know was that I owned every square inch of the venue she had chosen for her dream wedding. My name is Madison Reed, and I'm the founder and CEO of Moonrise Hospitality Group, a luxury event venue empire that spans 12 premium locations across the Pacific Northwest. At 32, I control properties worth over $200 million, employ nearly 800 people, and host some of the most exclusive events on the West Coast. Last month, Forbes featured me on their cover as one of America's most successful young entrepreneurs in the hospitality industry. But none of that mattered to Victoria when she decided I wasn't sophisticated enough to attend her society wedding. Standing here now, watching her dream wedding dissolve into absolute chaos, I should feel vindicated. I should feel satisfied that justice has been served. Instead, I feel something much more complex, a mixture of sadness and relief that years of family tension have finally reached their inevitable conclusion. Victoria had chosen Moonrise Manor specifically because it was the most prestigious wedding venue in Seattle, a restored 1920s mansion overlooking Puget Sound with crystal chandeliers, marble floors, and gardens that had been featured in Architectural Digest. She had put down a $50,000 deposit and signed a contract for what would have been a $300,000 celebration of her marriage to Brandon, heir to a software fortune and one of Seattle's most eligible bachelors. What she hadn't bothered to research was who actually owned the property she was so desperate to book. The morning everything unraveled started with a phone call from my assistant, Rebecca Chen, at exactly 7:30. I was reviewing quarterly revenue reports in my downtown Seattle office when she burst through the door without knocking, her face flushed with a mixture of excitement and disbelief. Victoria had just called the venue demanding to speak with the owner about removing someone from the guest list permanently. Not just asking them not to attend, but actually banning them from the property during the event. When Rebecca had asked who needed to be banned, Victoria had said my name with the kind of venom usually reserved for sworn enemies. The conversation that followed revealed the depth of Victoria's assumptions about my life and capabilities. She had apparently told the venue coordinator that her sister was unstable, unreliable, and had a history of causing scenes at family events. She wanted security stationed specifically to prevent me from entering the grounds, even if I somehow managed to find out the location. Rebecca had listened to this character assassination in stunned silence before informing Victoria that she would need to speak directly with the property owner about such an unusual request. Victoria had demanded to be connected immediately, insisting that money was no object and that the owner would certainly understand the need to protect such an important event from family drama. The silence that followed Rebecca's explanation of exactly who owned Moonrise Manor lasted nearly 30 seconds. Victoria had hung up without another word. I sat in my office for almost an hour, processing what had just happened. This wasn't a simple disagreement between sisters or a momentary lapse in judgment. Victoria had actively worked to have me banned from her wedding, going so far as to fabricate stories about my character and reliability. She had assumed that throwing money around would solve any obstacle, including her own sister's presence on the most important day of her life. The decision to cancel her wedding contract didn't come from anger, though there was certainly plenty of that. It came from a clarity that had been building for years about the fundamental difference in how Victoria and I viewed family, loyalty, and respect. She had made it clear that she considered my presence at her wedding to be an embarrassment that money could fix by simply keeping me away. What she had forgotten was that money had also built everything she wanted for her special day. The phone call I made to Victoria that afternoon was brief and professional. I informed her that Moonrise Manor was canceling her wedding contract effective immediately, that her deposit would be refunded within 7 business days, and that she would need to find an alternative venue for her Saturday ceremony. When she demanded an explanation, I simply told her that the venue owner had decided her event wasn't a good fit for the property. The explosion that followed was everything I had expected and more. Victoria screamed about contracts and legal obligations, threatened lawsuits and public relations disasters, and demanded to speak with whoever was really in charge because there was no way her little sister could have any actual authority over a venue of Moonrise Manor's caliber. When the reality finally sank in that I wasn't joking, that I actually did own the property and had the legal right to cancel her contract, Victoria's tone shifted from outrage to desperation. She offered to double the fee, then triple it. She promised that I could attend the wedding with full VIP treatment and any accommodations I required. She even suggested that we could use this as an opportunity to repair our relationship and move forward as a stronger family. But the damage was already done. Victoria had revealed exactly how she saw me and what she thought I was worth. No amount of money or last-minute apologies could undo the fact that she had been perfectly willing to have me banned from her wedding rather than simply include me as her sister. The wedding was supposed to take place in 36 hours. Victoria and Brandon had sent invitations to 200 guests, including Seattle's business elite, political figures, and entertainment personalities. The wedding planner, Patricia Maximilian, was one of the most sought-after coordinators on the West Coast, someone who charged 6-figure fees and had a waiting list that stretched for years. Canceling everything with less than 2 days' notice created a logistical nightmare that extended far beyond the venue. The florist had spent weeks growing custom orchids in climate-controlled greenhouses. The catering company had ordered specialty ingredients from around the world. The string quartet had turned down other bookings to be available for what they had been told was the social event of the season. But none of that was my responsibility anymore. Patricia called me directly within an hour of Victoria's cancellation. Her voice barely controlled as she explained the impossibility of finding an alternative venue of comparable quality on such short notice. Did I understand the reputational damage this would cause to everyone involved? Was I aware that several vendors had exclusive contracts that made them legally liable for failure to perform? I listened to her concerns with professional sympathy, while making it clear that Moonrise Manor's decision was final and non-negotiable. The venue was no longer available for Victoria's event, and no amount of pleading or financial incentives would change that outcome. The media attention started almost immediately. Seattle's society gossip columns had been anticipating Victoria and Brandon's wedding for months, describing it as the merger of 2 prominent families and a celebration that would set new standards for luxury events in the Pacific Northwest. When word spread that the wedding had been abruptly canceled due to a venue dispute, speculation ran wild about what could have possibly gone wrong. Victoria's friends and family began reaching out, first to offer sympathy and support, then to understand what had actually happened. The story that emerged painted me as an unstable family member who had somehow sabotaged my own sister's wedding out of jealousy and spite. Social media posts from Victoria's circle described the situation as a cautionary tale about mixing business with family and the dangers of trusting people who weren't truly committed to your success. But there were other voices, too. People who knew about my business accomplishments and found it hard to believe that someone who had built a successful hospitality empire would arbitrarily destroy a family member's wedding without significant provocation. Industry contacts who had worked with me for years and knew my reputation for professionalism and integrity. The truth as it slowly emerged through conversations and leaked details, was far more complex than either side initially presented. Victoria's attempts to have me banned from the wedding became public knowledge when several venue staff members confirmed the unusual security requests and the specific instructions about preventing my attendance. The wedding that was supposed to showcase Victoria's perfect life instead became a public relations disaster that exposed her character in ways she had never intended. The woman who had worried about being embarrassed by her sister's presence had created a scandal that dominated Seattle society gossip for weeks. Brandon's family, who had initially been supportive of the union, began expressing private concerns about Victoria's judgment and her treatment of family members. The Whitmores had built their fortune on software solutions that brought people together, and the idea of deliberately excluding family from major life events contradicted their core values. But the most significant impact was on Victoria herself. The confident, controlling woman who had planned every detail of her perfect wedding found herself scrambling to salvage not just an event, but her reputation and relationships. The sister she had dismissed as an embarrassment had revealed herself to be someone with the power to make or break the most important day of her life. Standing in the empty ballroom of Moonrise Manor now, watching the last of the wedding decorations being loaded into trucks, I think about the journey that brought us to this point. The years of condescension and dismissal, the assumptions about my capabilities and worth, the fundamental misunderstanding of who I had become and what I had built. Victoria had made her choice when she decided that my presence at her wedding would be an embarrassment. She had revealed her true feelings about our relationship and my place in her life. The fact that I owned the venue she had chosen was just the tool that allowed her true character to be exposed to everyone who mattered to her. The empty ballroom feels peaceful now, cleaned and restored to its original elegance. Tomorrow night, it will host a charity gala for children's literacy programs, an event that will bring together people who understand the value of family, education, and community support. The contrast with what Victoria had planned couldn't be more perfect. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. My phone buzzes with another text from Victoria, the 15th one today, alternating between apologies and threats, pleas for reconciliation, and promises of revenge. I delete it without reading the full message, just like I've deleted all the others. The sister who thought I would embarrass her perfect wedding had created the most embarrassing situation imaginable, all by herself. The irony would be amusing if it weren't so sad, but this is just the beginning of the story. The real question isn't what happened here tonight, but how we got to this point. How two sisters raised in the same house by the same parents could end up with such fundamentally different values and such complete misunderstanding of each other's character. That story begins 8 years ago, in a very different place, when neither of us could have imagined that it would end with canceled wedding contracts and empty ballrooms. Growing up in the affluent suburbs of Bellevue, Washington, Victoria and I were the picture-perfect daughters of successful parents who had built their wealth through careful planning and strategic investments. Our father, Robert Reed, was a commercial real estate developer who specialized in luxury residential projects throughout the Seattle metropolitan area. Our mother, Catherine, was a former interior designer who had transitioned into high-end event planning after we were born, building a client base among Seattle's elite families. The Reed family lived in a sprawling colonial house on 3 acres of meticulously landscaped grounds, complete with a tennis court, swimming pool, and guest house that our parents used to entertain clients and business associates. From the outside, we had everything that money could buy, and parents who were devoted to providing us with every advantage their success could afford. But even in those early years, the differences between Victoria and me were stark and impossible to ignore. Victoria, 3 years older than me, was everything our parents had dreamed of in a daughter. She was beautiful in the classical sense, with perfectly straight blonde hair that never seemed out of place, green eyes that photographed beautifully, and the kind of natural grace that made her the center of attention at every social gathering. More importantly, she understood intuitively how to navigate the complex social hierarchies that defined our family's world. By the age of 10, Victoria could work a room at our parents' dinner parties like a seasoned politician, charming business, associates and their wives with precocious observations about art, music, and current events. She remembered everyone's names, asked thoughtful questions about their children and interests, and possessed an uncanny ability to make adults feel both impressed and comfortable in her presence. Our parents were absolutely enchanted by Victoria's social gifts and frequently showcased her at family events and business functions. She became their secret weapon for making lasting impressions on potential clients and maintaining relationships with existing ones. Watching Victoria operate in these settings was like observing a masterclass in networking and relationship building. E, on the other hand, was the family puzzle that nobody quite knew how to solve. While Victoria thrived in social situations, I preferred spending time alone or with the household staff, learning about how things actually worked behind the scenes. Instead of mingling at our parents' cocktail parties, I would slip away to help the catering staff set up their equipment or ask detailed questions about how they planned and executed such elaborate events. By the age of 12, I could tell you exactly how much food to order for a party of 50, which vendors provided the best value for floral arrangements, and why certain room layouts facilitated better conversation flow than others. I understood the logistics of event planning in ways that fascinated me and bored everyone else in my family to tears. Our parents initially viewed my interests as a charming quirk that I would eventually outgrow. When other children my age were focused on sports, music lessons, or social activities, I was reading hospitality industry magazines and watching behind-the-scenes documentaries about major events and hotels. I collected business cards from every vendor who worked our family's parties and kept detailed notes about their services, pricing, and performance quality. The first real indication that my interests might develop into something more serious came during the summer I turned 14. Our parents had hired an event planning company called Cascade Celebrations to coordinate a massive charity auction at our house, an annual fundraiser for children's hospitals that typically attracted over 300 guests and raised significant money for pediatric medical research. The lead coordinator for the event was a woman named Elena Martinez, a 30-something entrepreneur who had built her company from nothing into one of Seattle's most respected event planning firms. Elena was everything I admired in a business owner: creative, organized, decisive, and completely in control of every detail while maintaining grace under pressure. I volunteered to help with setup and logistics, initially just to stay close to the action and observe how professional event coordination worked at the highest level. But Elena quickly recognized that my enthusiasm came with genuine understanding of the industry and began treating me as an unofficial assistant rather than just an eager teenager getting in the way. Over the course of that 3-day setup period, Elena taught me about vendor management, timeline coordination, contingency planning, and client relationship management. She showed me how to anticipate problems before they occurred, how to manage difficult personalities among staff and vendors, and how to maintain quality standards while working within budget constraints. The charity auction was flawless, raising over $400,000 and receiving coverage in Seattle Magazine as one of the most successful fundraising events of the year. But for me, the real victory was Elena's offer to hire me as a part-time intern the following summer, provided my parents approved and I maintained my academic performance. Victoria's reaction to my internship opportunity was dismissive and slightly condescending. She couldn't understand why I would want to spend my summer vacation working instead of enjoying the privileges our family's wealth afforded. In her view, understanding how events were planned and executed was fine as a hobby, but actually working in the service industry was beneath our social status. Our parents were conflicted about Elena's offer. They appreciated my work ethic and initiative, but worried that working for an event planning company might give me unrealistic ideas about career possibilities. Their vision for my future involved college, possibly graduate school, and then a professional career in law, medicine, or business management that would complement our family's social standing. The compromise we reached allowed me to work with Elena for 6 weeks during the summer, treating it as a learning experience rather than actual employment. I couldn't accept monetary compensation, but I could gain real-world experience in business operations while helping Elena's company handle their busiest season. That summer changed everything for me in ways that nobody in my family fully understood at the time. Working with Cascade Celebrations wasn't just about learning event planning techniques or understanding the hospitality industry. It was about discovering that I had natural talents for problem-solving, leadership, and customer service that felt more authentic and fulfilling than anything I had experienced in school or social settings. Elena's clients ranged from tech entrepreneurs, hosting product launches, to established families celebrating milestone anniversaries. Each event required different skills, creative approaches, and logistical solutions. I found myself energized by the variety and challenge in ways that traditional academic subjects never provided. More importantly, I was good at it. Really good. Elena frequently commented on my ability to anticipate client needs, communicate effectively with vendors, and maintain composure during high-stress situations. By the end of the summer, she was trusting me with responsibilities that typically required months of training and experience. The transformation didn't go unnoticed by our family, though the reactions varied significantly. Our parents acknowledged that the internship had given me valuable experience and maturity, but they remained focused on ensuring that I understood this was temporary enrichment rather than career preparation. Victoria, however, seemed almost threatened by my enthusiasm and competence in a field she had always dismissed as glorified party planning. She began making pointed comments about the difference between organizing events and attending them, suggesting that my interests reflected a fundamental misunderstanding of our family's social position. The tension came to a head during our annual family vacation to the San Juan Islands that August. We were staying at a luxury resort that specialized in corporate retreats and high-end weddings, exactly the kind of property I had been studying and learning about all summer. While Victoria spent her days at the spa and pool, I found myself drawn to the resort's operations areas, asking questions about their booking systems, vendor relationships, and guest services protocols. The resort manager, impressed by my knowledge and genuine interest, offered to give me a behind-the-scenes tour of their facilities. That tour revealed the incredible complexity and sophistication required to operate a luxury hospitality business successfully. The resort employed over 200 people across departments I had never considered: housekeeping, maintenance, food and beverage service, activity coordination, guest relations, and facility management. Each department required specialized knowledge and seamless coordination with others to create the experience that guests paid premium prices to enjoy. Standing in the resort's main event space, watching their team prepare for a wedding reception, scheduled for that evening, I experienced something I can only describe as a calling. This wasn't just about planning parties or coordinating vendors. This was about creating experiences that marked the most important moments in people's lives, about building businesses that brought families and communities together, about developing skills that could transform special occasions into lifelong memories. Victoria found me there an hour later, still talking with the resort's wedding coordinator about their booking process and client management system. Her embarrassment was obvious and immediate. In her view, I was behaving like an overeager tourist, asking inappropriate questions and inserting myself into situations where I didn't belong. The argument that followed revealed the fundamental difference in how we understood success, social status, and appropriate behavior for someone from our family background. Victoria believed that our parents' wealth and social position meant we should be consumers of luxury services, not providers of them. The idea that I might want to work in hospitality was as incomprehensible to her as if I had announced plans to become a factory worker or retail clerk, but I wasn't interested in consuming luxury experiences anymore. I wanted to create them. The rest of that vacation was marked by an uncomfortable tension that previewed conflicts to come. Victoria made it clear that she considered my interests embarrassing and my behavior inappropriate for someone with our family background. Our parents, caught between supporting my enthusiasm and maintaining family harmony, suggested that perhaps my hospitality interests could be channeled into something more suitable, like hotel management consulting or luxury travel writing. Nobody seemed to understand that I didn't want to write about the hospitality industry or advise others about it from a distance. I wanted to build it, own it, and create something significant within it. The summer internship with Elena had shown me possibilities that extended far beyond anything I had previously imagined for my future. But it had also revealed how differently my family and I understood success, ambition, and the value of different types of work. When school started that fall, I threw myself into business and economics courses with a focus that surprised my teachers and concerned my parents. I wasn't just learning about supply and demand or corporate finance theory. I was studying real estate development, franchise management, and hospitality industry trends with the intensity of someone preparing for a specific career, rather than general education. Elena remained a mentor and friend, allowing me to help with smaller events throughout the school year and continuing to teach me about business operations, customer service, and entrepreneurship. These experiences reinforced my conviction that hospitality was more than just a career interest. It was my passion and my calling. Victoria, meanwhile, was preparing for her senior year of high school with plans that perfectly aligned with our parents' expectations. She had been accepted to Stanford University, where she planned to study communications and political science before pursuing law school or business school. Her future was mapped out according to conventional markers of success and social status. The contrast between our chosen paths was becoming impossible to ignore, and the family dynamics were shifting in ways that would eventually lead to the wedding venue confrontation years later. Victoria was following the script our parents had written for successful children from privileged backgrounds. I was writing my own script entirely, but I was only 15 years old, and none of us could have predicted where my hospitality obsession would ultimately lead. The luxury venue empire, the Forbes recognition, and the power to cancel Victoria's wedding were still years away, hidden behind challenges and setbacks that would test every assumption about family loyalty, personal worth, and the meaning of success. The foundation was being laid for everything that would follow, but the structure we were building was far more complex and fragile than any of us realized at the time. By the time I graduated from the University of Washington's business program at 22, I had already been running my first hospitality venture for 2 years. Reed Events was a boutique event planning company that I had started during my junior year with $15,000 borrowed from my college fund and an ambitious vision to revolutionize how young professionals in Seattle celebrated major milestones. My business model was simple but innovative for its time. Instead of targeting wealthy families who could afford traditional high-end event planners, I focused on tech workers, young lawyers and medical residents who wanted sophisticated celebrations but couldn't justify spending $50,000 on a wedding or corporate event. Reed Events offered luxury experiences at accessible price points by leveraging technology, building strategic vendor partnerships, and operating with dramatically lower overhead than established competitors. The concept worked brilliantly for the first 18 months. I coordinated over 60 events ranging from intimate wedding ceremonies to product launch parties, consistently delivering results that exceeded client expectations while maintaining profit margins that allowed steady business growth. My client base was expanding through word-of-mouth referrals, and I had hired 3 part-time assistants to help manage the increasing workload. More importantly, I was proving that my hospitality instincts were commercially viable. Every event taught me something new about vendor management, client psychology, or operational efficiency. I was building systems and processes that could eventually scale beyond Seattle's young professional market into something much larger. and more sophisticated. Elena Martinez had become an informal advisor, providing guidance about business development and industry connections that proved invaluable during Reed Events' early growth phase. She introduced me to key vendors who were willing to work with a new company, helped me understand pricing strategies that balanced competitiveness with profitability, and shared insights about client management that prevented several potential disasters. Victoria's attitude toward my business venture was patronizing at best and actively undermining at worst. She had graduated from Stanford with honors and was working at a prestigious consulting firm in San Francisco, earning a six-figure salary and building the kind of career our parents had always envisioned for both of us. From her perspective, Reed Events was an expensive hobby that was delaying my transition into a serious professional career. During family dinners, Victoria would ask pointed questions about Reed Events' financial performance, sustainability, and growth prospects that were clearly designed to expose what she viewed as the inherent limitations of my business model. She frequently suggested that event planning was a saturated market with low barriers to entry and minimal profit potential, making it an unsuitable foundation for long-term wealth building. Our parents were more supportive but equally skeptical about Reed Events' potential as anything more than a temporary entrepreneurial experience. They appreciated my work ethic and business acumen, but repeatedly emphasized the importance of maintaining realistic expectations about the hospitality industry's limitations and my own experience level. The pressure to prove that Reed Events was more than just a college experiment intensified as I approached my 23rd birthday. Victoria had been promoted to senior consultant and was working on projects for Fortune 500 companies, while our parents were starting to ask direct questions about my long-term career plans and whether I intended to pursue graduate school or transition into corporate employment. That pressure led to the decision that would ultimately destroy everything I had built and validate every doubt my family had expressed about my business judgment. The opportunity came through a connection Elena had made with Marcus and Jennifer Patterson, a prominent Seattle couple who owned a chain of upscale restaurants and were planning their 25th wedding anniversary celebration. The Pattersons wanted to host a party for 500 guests that would showcase their restaurant's culinary capabilities while celebrating their marriage and business partnership. The event budget was $300,000, more than double anything Reed Events had previously handled. But the Pattersons were specifically interested in working with a younger, more innovative event planner who could bring fresh ideas to what could easily become a traditional, predictable celebration. Elena had recommended me for the project despite knowing that it exceeded my company's established capabilities. She believed that Reed Events' success with smaller, high-quality events demonstrated my potential to handle larger, more complex projects. More importantly, she thought the Patterson anniversary could serve as a breakthrough opportunity that would establish my company as a serious player in Seattle's luxury event market. The contract negotiation took 6 weeks and required legal expertise that stretched beyond anything I had previously encountered. The Pattersons demanded detailed timelines, vendor guarantees, and performance standards that protected their investment while ensuring their anniversary celebration met the standards expected by their social and business networks. But the financial opportunity was irresistible. The Patterson contract would generate more revenue than Reed Events had earned in the previous year combined. Success would provide capital for significant business expansion and establish credibility with the luxury market segment I had always planned to pursue eventually. I signed the contract in March for an October celebration, giving myself 7 months to plan and execute an event that would define Reed Events' future trajectory. The timeline seemed adequate for a project of this complexity, and I was confident that my vendor relationships and operational systems could scale to meet the Pattersons' requirements. The first signs of trouble emerged in May when I began receiving quotes from vendors for the various components of the anniversary celebration. The catering requirements alone would cost nearly twice what I had budgeted, and several key vendors were already booked for Patterson's preferred date in October. The floral arrangements would require custom greenhouse cultivation that needed to begin immediately, and the entertainment budget was consuming resources I had allocated for other essential services. More critically, I discovered that coordinating an event for 500 guests required logistics capabilities that Reed Events simply didn't possess. The venue setup would take 3 days instead of the single day I had planned for. Transportation and parking coordination required partnerships with companies I had never worked with before. Guest management systems needed technology upgrades. That would cost thousands of dollars. Every aspect of the Patterson project was revealing gaps in my knowledge, experience, and operational capacity that I hadn't anticipated during the contract negotiation phase. What had seemed like a natural evolution of Reed Events' capabilities was actually a quantum leap that required resources and expertise I didn't possess. By July, it was clear that Reed Events couldn't deliver the Patterson anniversary celebration. Without fundamental changes to how my company operated, I needed to hire additional full-time staff, establish relationships with entirely new categories of vendors, and invest in technology and equipment that would strain my cash flow beyond sustainable limits. The logical solution would have been to approach Elena about partnering on the Patterson project, combining Reed Events' innovative approach with Cascade Celebration's established infrastructure and experience. But my pride and determination to prove Reed Events' independent capabilities prevented me from acknowledging that I needed help until it was too late to salvage the situation gracefully. Instead, I decided to push forward with the original plan, believing that my passion and work ethic could overcome the operational challenges that were becoming more obvious and overwhelming with each passing week. The breaking point came in early September, when 3 critical vendors simultaneously informed me that they couldn't fulfill their commitments for the Patterson anniversary. The custom floral arrangements couldn't be completed on schedule due to greenhouse equipment failures. The preferred catering company had overbooked and was withdrawing from projects that hadn't provided full payment in advance. The entertainment coordinator had discovered scheduling conflicts that made the originally planned performance lineup impossible. Each vendor cancellation created cascading effects that disrupted other aspects of the event planning timeline. Alternative vendors were either unavailable, significantly more expensive, or unable to meet the quality standards the Pattersons expected. Every solution I found created new problems that required additional resources and compromises that moved the final event further away from what had been promised in the original contract. The Pattersons, who had been patient and supportive during the early planning phases, became increasingly concerned about Reed Events' ability to deliver their anniversary celebration as specified. Marcus Patterson began calling weekly for status updates, and Jennifer started requesting detailed vendor confirmations and timeline documentation that revealed the extent of the problems I was facing. By mid-September, it was obvious that Reed Events couldn't fulfill the Patterson contract without significant modifications to the original scope and budget. The event I had promised to deliver for $300,000 would actually cost nearly $500,000 to execute properly, and even then, several elements would fall short of the standards I had originally guaranteed. Conversation with Marcus and Jennifer Patterson that ended Reed Events took place in their downtown Seattle restaurant on a rainy Thursday evening in late September. I had requested the meeting to discuss modifications to the anniversary celebration timeline and budget, hoping to negotiate a solution that would allow the event to proceed with reduced scope and expectations. Instead, I found myself explaining how Reed Events had systematically overpromised and underdelivered across every aspect of their anniversary project. The vendor relationships I had claimed to possess were insufficient for an event of this scale. The operational systems I had described as proven and reliable were actually improvised and untested. The timeline I had presented as realistic was based on assumptions that had proven completely inaccurate. Marcus listened to my explanation with the patience of someone who had built his own business from nothing and understood how entrepreneurial ambition could exceed practical capabilities. But Jennifer's questions were pointed and devastating. revealing that they had already begun investigating Reed Events' track record and discovered the significant gap between my previous projects and their anniversary requirements. The Pattersons gave me two options: find a way to deliver the anniversary celebration exactly as specified in the original contract, or cancel the project entirely and refund their $50,000 deposit, along with compensation for the planning time and vendor commitments that would be lost due to the cancellation. Reed Events didn't have $50,000 available for an immediate refund. The Patterson deposit had been used to pay vendors, staff, and operational expenses over the previous 6 months. Returning their money would require liquidating everything I owned and borrowing additional funds from sources I couldn't identify. But attempting to deliver their anniversary celebration would be even more financially devastating. The additional costs required to fulfill the original contract would bankrupt Reed Events and leave me personally liable for vendor commitments that exceeded my total net worth. I chose to cancel the Patterson project. The aftermath of the Patterson cancellation destroyed Reed Events within 6 weeks. Word spread quickly through Seattle's event planning community that my company had taken on a project beyond its capabilities and failed to deliver as promised. Vendors who had worked with Reed Events on previous projects began demanding payment in advance for future commitments. Potential clients started canceling consultations and requesting references that I could no longer provide confidently. The financial collapse was swift and comprehensive. Reed Events had outstanding vendor commitments that exceeded our cash flow capabilities. The Patterson refund consumed my personal savings and required borrowing against my college fund. Equipment rentals and technology subscriptions became unaffordable as client bookings disappeared. By December, Reed Events was officially out of business. The office space I had leased was empty, the equipment was sold to pay debts, and my 3 part-time assistants had found positions with other event planning companies. The business cards and marketing materials that had represented 2 years of building something meaningful were boxed up and stored in my childhood bedroom. The failure felt personal and professional in ways I hadn't anticipated. Seattle's event planning community was small and interconnected, and news of Reed Events' collapse became a cautionary tale about young entrepreneurs who overextended themselves by taking on projects beyond their experience level. Elena tried to be supportive during the liquidation process, but even she acknowledged that the Patterson project had been too ambitious for a company of Reed Events' size and experience. The lesson she emphasized was about understanding limitations and building capabilities gradually, rather than making quantum leaps that could destroy everything if they failed. Victoria's reaction to Reed Events' bankruptcy was a mixture of sympathy and validation that was almost worse than outright criticism. She offered to help with the financial cleanup, while repeatedly emphasizing that the failure demonstrated exactly the risks she had been warning about for years. In her view, the Patterson project had confirmed that entrepreneurship was fundamentally unsuitable for someone without extensive business experience and significant financial backing. Our parents were supportive but clearly relieved that my experimental phase had ended before causing more serious damage to my future prospects. They suggested that Reed Events had been a valuable learning experience that would inform better career decisions going forward, preferably in more stable and predictable industries. But standing in my empty office space for the last time, boxing up the business plans and vendor contacts that represented everything I had learned about hospitality, I wasn't ready to accept that Reed Events' failure meant the end of my entrepreneurial ambitions. The Patterson project had been a disaster, but it had also taught me crucial lessons about project management, resource allocation, and operational scaling that I could never have learned any other way. The failure was devastating, but it was also education that would inform every future decision I made about building hospitality businesses. Reed Events was finished, but I wasn't. 3 months after Reed Events' collapse, Victoria suggested we meet for lunch to discuss my future. She had flown up from San Francisco specifically for this conversation, taking time away from her consulting projects to address what she clearly viewed as a family crisis that required immediate intervention. The restaurant she chose was Canlis, one of Seattle's most prestigious establishments, a place where business deals were made and important conversations took place among people who mattered in the city's professional hierarchy. Victoria arrived precisely on time, dressed in the kind of expensive business attire that announced her success before she even spoke, carrying a leather portfolio that suggested this wouldn't be a casual, sisterly chat. I was wearing jeans and a sweater from Target, having spent the morning helping our parents reorganize their home office and trying to figure out how to rebuild my life from the ruins of my failed business. The contrast between us felt deliberate and pointed, a visual representation of the different paths our lives had taken since graduation. Victoria ordered her usual, the Caesar salad with grilled salmon, and waited until we were seated in a quiet corner booth before launching into what was clearly a prepared presentation. Her tone was professional and measured, the same voice she probably used when delivering difficult news to consulting clients about operational inefficiencies or strategic miscalculations. She began by acknowledging that Reed Event's failure had been painful for everyone involved, but particularly devastating for me given how much time, energy, and emotional investment I had put into building the company. She recognized that watching something you cared deeply about collapse despite your best efforts was one of the most difficult experiences anyone could endure. But then she shifted into analysis mode, systematically dissecting every aspect of my business approach and decision-making process over the previous 2 years. According to Victoria's assessment, Reed Event's failure wasn't the result of bad luck, market conditions, or even the Patterson project specifically. It was the inevitable outcome of fundamental flaws in my understanding of business operations, risk management, and my own capabilities as an entrepreneur. The presentation she delivered over the next hour was devastating in its thoroughness and clinical precision. Victoria had clearly done extensive research into Reed Event's financial records, vendor relationships, and operational procedures. She questioned my expansion timeline, my client concentration strategy, my vendor selection criteria, and ultimately my fitness for business ownership altogether. Her analysis revealed problems I had never fully acknowledged even to myself. Reed Events had been operating on dangerously thin profit margins that left no room for unexpected expenses or revenue shortfalls. My vendor relationships were built on personal charm and optimism rather than formal contracts and performance guarantees. The operational systems I had developed were adequate for small events, but completely inadequate for scaling to larger, more complex projects. Most damaging was Victoria's assessment of my decision-making process during the Patterson project crisis. Instead of seeking help from Elena or other experienced event planners when problems began emerging, I had chosen to struggle alone rather than admit that Reed Events needed assistance. My pride and determination to prove the company's independent capabilities had prevented me from making rational choices that might have salvaged the situation. Victoria presented this analysis with charts and financial projections she had prepared on her laptop, downloaded spreadsheets that demonstrated Reed Events' structural weaknesses and cash flow vulnerabilities. She had even researched industry benchmarks for event planning companies, showing how my business model compared unfavorably to established competitors in terms of profit margins, client retention, and operational efficiency. But the personal dimension of her critique was even more devastating than the business analysis. Victoria explained that she had been watching my entrepreneurial efforts with growing concern for years, recognizing patterns of behavior that suggested I wasn't suited for the psychological demands of business ownership. According to her assessment, successful entrepreneurs required specific personality traits and capabilities that I simply didn't possess. They needed to be ruthlessly objective about market realities, willing to make difficult decisions based on data rather than emotion, and capable of accepting failure without letting it compromise their judgment about future opportunities. My Attachment to Reed events had been too emotional and personal, preventing me from making rational decisions when the business began experiencing problems. Instead of treating the company as a financial investment that could be modified or abandoned based on performance metrics, I had viewed it as an extension of my identity that needed to be preserved at any cost. Victoria's analysis extended beyond Reed events to encompass my entire approach to career development and goal setting. She pointed out that I had never worked for an established company in the hospitality industry, never learned standard operating procedures from experienced managers, and never gained the practical knowledge that came from observing how successful businesses actually functioned on a day-to-day basis. My understanding of event planning was based primarily on Elena's mentorship and my own limited experience with relatively simple projects. I had never managed large teams, negotiated complex vendor contracts, or handled the financial complexities that came with scaling a service business beyond its initial customer base. The hospitality industry was notoriously difficult, even for experienced entrepreneurs with significant financial backing and established industry connections. Attempting to build a successful event planning company straight out of college, without previous management experience or substantial capital reserves, had been naive and unrealistic from the beginning. Victoria's conclusion was that Reed events' failure demonstrated my fundamental unsuitability for entrepreneurship and the necessity of accepting more conventional career paths that aligned with my actual capabilities and experience level. She had researched employment opportunities in Seattle's hospitality sector and identified several positions that would allow me to use my event planning knowledge within established corporate structures. Hotel management companies needed coordinators for their conference and wedding services. Established event planning firms hired project managers who could handle client relationships and vendor coordination under experienced supervision. These positions offered stable salaries, professional development opportunities, and the chance to learn industry best practices from people who had built successful businesses over decades rather than months. More importantly, they would provide the experience and credibility I would need if I ever wanted to consider entrepreneurship again in the future. Victoria had even arranged preliminary conversations with hiring managers at 3 different companies, pending my agreement to pursue stable employment instead of what she characterized as continued entrepreneurial fantasy. Her presentation concluded with what she clearly intended as supportive guidance about rebuilding my career and reputation. After Reed events' very public failure, the event planning community in Seattle was small and interconnected, but people understood that young entrepreneurs sometimes made mistakes that didn't necessarily reflect their long-term potential. If I was willing to acknowledge that the Patterson project had been beyond my capabilities and demonstrate genuine commitment to learning proper business practices through conventional employment, most industry professionals would be willing to give me a second chance as an employee rather than a competitor. But continuing to pursue entrepreneurship without gaining significant additional experience would be viewed as evidence that I hadn't learned from Reed events' failure and wasn't capable of making realistic assessments about my own limitations. Victoria's tone throughout this presentation was caring but firm, the way someone might explain a difficult medical diagnosis or financial reality that couldn't be ignored or wished away. She genuinely believed she was helping me avoid further damage to my career and reputation by steering me toward more appropriate professional goals. When I finally found my voice to respond, I asked if she really thought I should give up on building something meaningful in the hospitality industry, on trying to create events and experiences that brought people together for important moments in their lives. Her answer was immediate and devastating. Victoria looked me directly in the eyes and explained that entrepreneurship required capabilities I had proven I didn't possess. The Patterson project hadn't been an unlucky break or a learning experience. It had been evidence of fundamental gaps in my business judgment, risk assessment, and operational management that made me unsuitable for business ownership. Reed events. Failure had demonstrated that I was better suited for supporting roles within established organizations rather than leadership positions that required independent decision-making and accountability for complex business outcomes. She wasn't trying to crush my dreams or diminish my passion for hospitality. She was trying to help me find realistic ways to pursue that passion without risking further professional and financial disasters that could permanently damage my career prospects. The words hung in the air between us like a verdict that couldn't be appealed or overturned. 2 years of building Reed events, 18-hour days developing vendor relationships and client management systems, the small victories and incremental progress toward establishing myself in Seattle's event planning community, all of it reduced to evidence of my fundamental inadequacy as a business owner. Victoria wasn't being cruel, which somehow made her assessment even more painful. She was being honest, at least from her perspective, about my limitations and the necessity of accepting them before they caused more damage to myself and our family's reputation. Our parents had clearly been part of Victoria's research and planning process. They had provided financial records from Reed Events' collapse and shared their own concerns about my judgment and decision-making during the Patterson project crisis. Victoria's presentation reflected not just her individual assessment, but a family consensus about my entrepreneurial capabilities and future prospects. The lunch ended with Victoria outlining a timeline for my transition into conventional employment. She recommended that I spend the next month researching the positions she had identified and preparing for interviews with a focus on demonstrating maturity and realistic expectations about career development. The hiring managers she had contacted were expecting to hear from me within 2 weeks, and delaying those conversations would send the wrong message about my commitment to rebuilding my professional reputation through stable employment rather than continued entrepreneurial experimentation. Victoria paid for lunch and offered to help with interview preparation, resume development, and salary negotiation once I had decided which position offered the best long-term prospects for career advancement within established industry structures. Walking back to my car after that lunch, I felt more defeated than I had even during Reed Events' liquidation process. Business failure was one thing. Entrepreneurs faced setbacks all the time, and many successful business owners had experienced multiple failures before achieving significant success. But family rejection of my core identity and capabilities was something entirely different. Victoria had articulated doubts that had been gnawing at me since the Patterson project collapsed, fears that maybe I really wasn't cut out for the entrepreneurial path I had chosen since college. Maybe she was right. Maybe the sensible thing was to find a stable job within an established company, rebuild my savings and reputation, and leave business ownership to people who actually possessed the skills and temperament that success required. For the next 2 weeks, I went through the motions of exploring the employment opportunities Victoria had arranged. I had informational interviews with hotel management coordinators and established event planning firms, toured corporate offices with beige cubicles and motivational posters about teamwork and customer service, and listened to hiring managers describe career advancement paths that felt like carefully constructed prisons. Every conversation reinforced how far I had fallen from my original ambitions and how limited my options had become after Reed Events' collapse. The managers I spoke with were professionally sympathetic about my business failure, but made it clear that my entrepreneurial experience would be viewed as a liability rather than an asset until I demonstrated reliable performance within conventional employment structures. One particularly demoralizing interview took place at a mid-sized hotel chain that specialized in corporate conferences and business meetings. The human resources director, a well-meaning woman in her 50s, explained how my Reed Events experience might actually be valuable in their event coordination department. Failed entrepreneurs, she suggested, brought realistic perspectives about operational challenges that could help the company avoid common mistakes in project management and vendor relationships. I would be living proof of what happened when event planning companies didn't properly assess their capabilities and maintain conservative growth strategies. Sitting in that sterile conference room, listening to my failure being repackaged as a selling point for risk-averse corporate practices, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. This wasn't who I was or who I wanted to become, regardless of what Victoria believed about my limitations and appropriate career paths. Reed Events had failed, but the vision behind it hadn't been wrong. The execution had been flawed, the timeline had been unrealistic, and my operational capabilities had been insufficient for the Patterson project's complexity. But those were problems that could be solved through better planning, more conservative growth strategies, and systematic capability building rather than entrepreneurial surrender. Victoria's assessment of my business judgment was based on a single, failed project that had taught me more about hospitality operations, vendor management, and financial planning than any employment position could ever provide. The failure had been devastating, but it had also been education that would inform every future decision I made about building service businesses. That evening, I drove to the waterfront park where Elena and I had first discussed my internship plans during high school. Sitting on the same bench where she had explained the difference between organizing events and creating experiences, I realized that Victoria's verdict about my entrepreneurial fitness was fundamentally flawed. She had mistaken a learning experience for evidence of permanent inadequacy, unable to distinguish between poor execution and invalid vision. Reed Events had failed because of strategic mistakes and operational inexperience, not because I lacked the fundamental capabilities that successful business ownership required. The idea that would eventually become Moonrise Hospitality Group was beginning to form that night, sitting by the water, watching ferries cross Puget Sound. Instead of trying to compete with established event planning companies on their terms, what if I could create something entirely different? What if the real opportunity wasn't in traditional event coordination, but in building and owning the venues where memorable experiences actually took place? Victoria's prediction about my entrepreneurial recovery was about to be tested in ways that neither of us could have imagined. For the next 6 months, I tried to follow Victoria's carefully mapped plan for my professional rehabilitation. I accepted a position as an events coordinator at the Seattle Marriott downtown, a job that paid $42,000 annually and came with health benefits, vacation time, and the kind of structured career advancement path that my family viewed as appropriate for someone with my background and recent business failures. The work itself was mind-numbing in ways I hadn't anticipated. My responsibilities involved coordinating conferences and corporate meetings within systems and procedures that had been established decades earlier. Every decision required approval from multiple supervisors. Every vendor relationship was governed by corporate contracts negotiated at the national level, and every event followed templates that prioritized consistency and cost control over creativity or innovation. My direct supervisor, Carol Henderson, was a 15-year company veteran who had worked her way up from receptionist to senior events manager through patient adherence to corporate protocols and careful avoidance of anything that might be perceived as risky or unconventional. She viewed my Reed Events experience with suspicion, frequently reminding me that entrepreneurial thinking was inappropriate in corporate environments that required team players rather than individual innovators. The clients we served were primarily business travelers and corporate groups who needed functional meeting spaces and reliable catering services. Their events were focused on efficiency rather than experience, with success measured by staying within budget and avoiding complaints rather than creating memorable moments or meaningful connections. After 2 years of building Reed Events around the belief that hospitality should enhance life's most important occasions, working within Marriott's standardized approach to event coordination felt like professional suffocation. Every day reinforced how differently I understood the purpose and potential of hospitality services, compared to the corporate mindset that governed established hotel chains. But I persevered because Victoria's analysis of my situation seemed increasingly accurate as the months passed. My Reed Events failure had indeed damaged my reputation within Seattle's event planning community, and rebuilding credibility would require demonstrating reliability within conventional employment structures before anyone would trust me with independent business responsibilities again. The Marriott position also provided steady income that allowed me to pay off the remaining debts from Reed Events' collapse and begin rebuilding the personal savings that had been wiped out during the business liquidation. Financial stability was something I hadn't appreciated fully until I lost it, and having a regular paycheck eliminated the constant stress about covering basic living expenses that had characterized the final months of my entrepreneurial venture. Victoria. Visited Seattle quarterly to monitor my progress and ensure that I was adapting successfully to corporate employment. These check-ins were always professionally supportive but subtly condescending, with Victoria praising my growing maturity and realistic expectations while making it clear that she viewed my current stability as evidence that her intervention had been necessary and beneficial. Our parents were obviously relieved that I had found stable employment within a respected hospitality company. They frequently mentioned my Marriott position to friends and colleagues as evidence that my entrepreneurial phase had been a valuable learning experience that had informed better career decisions. The underlying message was clear. I had finally accepted my limitations and chosen a path that aligned with my actual capabilities. But working within the Marriott's operational framework was also teaching me things about the hospitality industry that I had never understood during my Reed Events years. I was learning how large hospitality companies managed vendor relationships, maintained quality standards across multiple locations, and built systems that could operate efficiently regardless of individual employee turnover. More importantly, I was observing the gaps between what established hospitality companies provided and what clients actually wanted from their event experiences. The corporate meetings and conferences we coordinated were functional but forgettable, delivered according to templates that prioritized operational efficiency over emotional impact or lasting memories. Clients frequently expressed frustration with the limited customization options available within corporate hotel systems. They wanted more creative catering options, more flexible room configurations, and more personalized service than standardized procedures allowed. But the Marriott's business model was built around consistency and cost control rather than innovation and customization. The breakthrough realization came during a particularly frustrating week in my 8th month at the Marriott. I was coordinating a product launch event for a Seattle tech startup that wanted to create something memorable for their investors and employees, but every suggestion they made was either prohibited by corporate policy or prohibitively expensive. Within the hotel's pricing structure, the startup's founder, David Kim, was a brilliant software engineer who had built his company from nothing into a promising venture that was attracting serious investor attention. But he was struggling to find a venue that could accommodate his vision for a product launch that would reflect his company's innovative culture and commitment to challenging conventional approaches to business problems. David's frustration with the limitations of traditional hotel event spaces led to a conversation that would change my understanding of opportunity within the hospitality industry. He explained that Seattle's tech community was growing rapidly, filled with entrepreneurs and innovators who wanted event venues that reflected their values and aesthetics, rather than generic corporate environments. These companies had significant budgets for marketing events, team celebrations, and client entertainment, but they were frustrated by the limited options available in Seattle's established hospitality market. They didn't want sterile conference rooms and standardized catering, manus. They wanted unique spaces that could be customized for their specific needs and company cultures. David's comments sparked a research project that consumed my evenings and weekends for the next 2 months. I began systematically analyzing Seattle's event venue market, identifying gaps between what clients wanted and what established providers offered. The patterns that emerged were striking and consistent across multiple industry segments. Traditional hotels and conference centers were optimized for efficiency and cost control, rather than experience and customization. Private clubs and historics. Venues were expensive and often inflexible about event formats and vendor relationships. Restaurant private dining rooms were intimate but limited in capacity and technical capabilities, but there was virtually nothing available for clients who wanted sophisticated, customizable event spaces that could accommodate everything from corporate presentations to wedding receptions with the same level of quality and service excellence. The market research revealed an opportunity that nobody in Seattle's hospitality industry seemed to be addressing systematically. There was growing demand for premium event venues that combined the service standards of luxury hotels with the flexibility and customization options of private event spaces. More importantly, this opportunity was emerging just as Seattle's economy was attracting an unprecedented influx of tech companies, biotech firms, and other innovative businesses whose leaders valued creativity and authenticity over traditional corporate formality. The idea that would eventually become Moonrise Hospitality Group began forming during those late-night research sessions in my studio apartment. Instead of competing with established event planning companies or trying to build another service business with limited scalability, what if I could own and operate the venues where premium events actually took place? Property ownership would provide the foundation for sustainable competitive advantages that service businesses could never achieve. Venues could be designed specifically to address the gaps I had identified in Seattle's current market. Revenue would come from multiple streams including space rental, catering services, and vendor partnerships, rather than depending entirely on project-based fees. Most importantly, owning venues would allow me to create the kinds of experiences I had always envisioned during my REIT events years without the operational limitations that had led to the Patterson Project disaster. But the financial requirements for acquiring and developing premium event venues were enormous compared to anything I had attempted with REIT events. Property acquisition, renovation, permitting, and operational setup would require hundreds of thousands of dollars in initial capital that I couldn't possibly accumulate through Marriott employment savings alone. The research phase extended into detailed analysis of Seattle's commercial real estate market, identifying properties that could be converted into premium event venues with reasonable renovation investments. I studied zoning requirements, permitting processes, and licensing procedures that would be required for hospitality operations. I also began developing relationships with vendors, contractors, and industry professionals who could provide expertise about venue development, operations, and marketing. These conversations were conducted carefully to avoid alerting my Marriott supervisors about my continued entrepreneurial interests, but they provided invaluable insights about the practical challenges of building hospitality businesses around property ownership rather than service delivery. Elena Martinez remained a trusted advisor throughout this research and planning phase. She had followed my Marriott employment with approval, viewing it as necessary professional development that would provide industry knowledge and credibility for future entrepreneurial ventures. But she also understood my frustration with corporate limitations and encouraged my investigation of venue ownership opportunities. Elena's own experience building Cascade celebrations had taught her about the constraints that service businesses faced when they didn't control the physical spaces where their events took place. Venue owners ultimately determined pricing, availability, and operational procedures that limited how creative and flexible event planners could be with their clients. But Elena also emphasized the enormous capital requirements and operational complexity involved in venue ownership. Unlike event planning services, hospitality properties required substantial ongoing investments in maintenance, insurance, staffing, and regulatory compliance that could become financially overwhelming if revenue projections proved overly optimistic. The decision point came 10 months into my Marriott employment when Victoria made one of her quarterly visits to assess my progress toward conventional career success. She was clearly pleased with my apparent adaptation to corporate employment and suggested that I might be ready to consider management training programs that could lead to advancement within established hospitality companies. Victoria's vision for my future involved gradually climbing the corporate ladder at companies like Marriott, eventually reaching senior management positions that would provide financial security and professional respect without the risks associated with business ownership. She viewed my current stability as evidence that entrepreneurship had been an inappropriate detour rather than a valuable foundation for future ventures. But sitting across from Victoria in the same restaurant where she had delivered her verdict about my entrepreneurial inadequacy 18 months earlier, I realized that her assessment had been fundamentally wrong about my capabilities and fundamentally right about my need for additional industry knowledge and experience. The Marriott position had provided exactly the operational education that Reed Events had lacked. I now understood hotel industry financial models, vendor management systems, and regulatory requirements that would be essential for venue ownership. More importantly, I had observed firsthand the limitations of established hospitality companies and identified specific opportunities that they were failing to address. Victoria's plan to rehabilitate my career through conventional employment had actually accelerated my preparation for a much more ambitious entrepreneurial venture than Reed Events had ever represented. When I explained my venue ownership concept to Victoria that evening, her reaction was immediate and predictable. She viewed my continued entrepreneurial thinking as evidence that I hadn't learned the lessons that Reed Events' failure should have taught me about accepting my limitations and pursuing realistic career goals. According to Victoria's analysis, venue ownership was exponentially more complex and risky than event planning services. The capital requirements were enormous, the operational challenges were multifaceted, and the potential for catastrophic failure was even greater than what I had experienced with Reed Events. But I was no longer the inexperienced college graduate who had built Reed Events through passion and optimism without understanding industry realities. The Marriott employment had provided systematic education about hospitality operations, financial management, and regulatory compliance that would inform every aspect of venue development and operations. More importantly, the market opportunity I had identified was based on extensive research and analysis rather than assumptions and enthusiasm. Seattle's event venue market had genuine gaps that could be addressed profitably by someone with the right combination of hospitality knowledge, financial resources, and operational capabilities. Victoria remained unconvinced that I possessed the financial resources or operational capabilities that venue ownership would require. But for the first time since Reed Events' collapse, I felt confident that her assessment was wrong about my potential for entrepreneurial success. The conversation ended with Victoria suggesting that I spend more time focusing on advancement opportunities within the Marriott, rather than pursuing entrepreneurial fantasies that would inevitably lead to another professional disaster. But walking back to my apartment that night, I realized that the dark period of conventional employment was ending. I had learned what I needed to learn, saved what I needed to save, and identified an opportunity that aligned with everything I understood about hospitality markets and customer needs. Victoria's prediction about my entrepreneurial recovery was about to be tested by something much more ambitious than Reed Events had ever represented. Leaving the Marriott after 14 months of corporate employment felt like emerging from a professional cocoon. I had entered that job as a failed entrepreneur seeking refuge from the wreckage of Reed Events. I emerged with a systematic understanding of hospitality operations, $35,000 in savings, and a comprehensive business plan for what would become Moonrise Hospitality Group. The first property I targeted was an abandoned 1920s mansion in Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood that had been sitting empty for 3 years, while the owners struggled with zoning disputes and renovation costs. The Ashford estate was exactly the kind of property that could be transformed into a premium event venue with the right vision and sufficient capital investment. The mansion itself was architecturally stunning, with original hardwood floors, crystal, chandeliers, and period details that created the sophisticated atmosphere Seattle's event market lacked. More importantly, the property included 5 acres of landscaped grounds with gardens, courtyards, and mature trees that could accommodate outdoor ceremonies and receptions. But the Ashford estate was also a massive renovation project that would require expertise in historic preservation, modern hospitality systems, and complex permitting processes. The asking price was $400,000, and renovation estimates ranged from $200,000 to $500,000 depending on the scope of modernization and infrastructure improvements. The financial challenge seemed insurmountable until I discovered a small business administration loan program specifically designed to support hospitality ventures in designated historic districts. The SBA program offered favorable terms for entrepreneurs who could demonstrate industry experience, detailed business plans, and commitment to preserving architectural heritage while creating modern business operations. The loan application process took 6 months and required documentation. That exceeded anything I had prepared during my REIT events years. I needed financial projections for 5 years of operations, detailed renovation timelines with contractor estimates, market analysis demonstrating demand for premium event venues, and personal guarantees that would make me liable for the full loan amount if Moonrise Hospitality failed to meet its obligations. Elena Martinez proved invaluable during the planning phase, providing references, reviewing business plan drafts, and connecting me with contractors who specialized in historic property renovations. Her endorsement carried significant weight with the SBA reviewers, who viewed her as a credible industry professional capable of assessing my qualifications and the viability of my business concept. The loan approval came through in December, providing $350,000 in financing that would allow me to purchase the Ashford estate and begin the renovation process. The approval felt like vindication of everything I had learned during my corporate employment and validation that my venue ownership concept addressed genuine market opportunities. But the real work was just beginning. Renovating the Ashford estate into a functional event venue required coordination of dozens of contractors, architects, and specialists over an 8-month timeline that tested every project management skill I had developed during my REIT events and Marriott years. Historic preservation requirements limited how extensively the mansion's original features could be modified, while modern hospitality standards demanded commercial-grade electrical systems, handicap accessibility, and food service capabilities that hadn't existed when the house was built. The kitchen renovation alone consumed 6 weeks and $60,000, transforming a residential space into a commercial facility capable of supporting catering operations for events ranging from intimate dinners to large receptions. The electrical system required complete replacement to handle sound equipment, lighting systems, and climate control that modern events demanded. More challenging was navigating the permitting process for converting a residential property into a commercial hospitality venue. Seattle's zoning authorities required environmental impact assessments, traffic studies, and neighborhood approval processes that seemed designed to discourage exactly the kind of innovative business development I was attempting. Each permit application required specific documentation, engineering reports, and compliance certifications that consumed weeks of time and thousands of dollars in professional fees. The learning curve was steep, but every challenge provided education about regulatory frameworks that would inform future venue acquisitions and development projects. The first event at Moonrise Manor was my own test run, a small gathering for industry professionals, contractors, and potential clients who could provide feedback about the venue's capabilities and identify any operational issues that needed to be addressed before official launch. 35 people attended that initial event, including Elena, several former Marriott colleagues, and David Kim, the tech entrepreneur whose frustration with Seattle's venue limitations had sparked my original market research. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive, with guests commenting on the unique combination of historic elegance and modern functionality that wasn't available anywhere else in Seattle's event market. More importantly, 3 potential clients approached me that evening about booking future events, providing immediate validation that demand existed for the kind of premium, customizable venue that Moonrise Manor represented. The official launch took place 6 weeks later with a grand opening celebration that attracted over 200 guests, including event planners, corporate executives, wedding coordinators, and media representatives from Seattle's hospitality and business publications. The event was designed to showcase Moonrise Manor's versatility and service capabilities, while demonstrating that my venue could compete with established hospitality properties on quality and sophistication. The grand opening generated media coverage that exceeded my most optimistic expectations. Seattle Magazine featured Moonrise Manor in their dining and events section, highlighting the venue's unique combination of historic architecture and modern amenities. The Seattle Times business section included a profile of my transition from corporate employment to venue ownership, positioning Moonrise Hospitality as an example of innovative entrepreneurship in the city's evolving hospitality market. More significantly, the grand opening resulted in 12 confirmed bookings within the first month, including corporate events, wedding receptions, and private celebrations that would provide immediate revenue to support the venue's ongoing operations and debt service obligations. The early success pattern established during Moonrise Manor's first year exceeded every projection in my original business plan. We hosted 87 events generating over $400,000 in revenue, with profit margins that validated the financial model I had developed during my market research phase. Client satisfaction was extraordinarily high, with average ratings of 4.8 out of 5, and referral rates that drove consistent new business without requiring significant marketing investments. The combination of unique venue characteristics, personalized service, and operational flexibility created a value proposition that justified premium pricing while building strong client loyalty. But the most meaningful validation came from industry, professionals who had witnessed Reed Events' failure and my subsequent corporate employment. Event planners who had been skeptical about working with me after the Patterson Project disaster were now actively recommending Moonrise Manor to their clients and requesting to collaborate on events that leveraged our venue's distinctive capabilities. Success attracted attention from potential investors who were interested in supporting expansion of the Moonrise hospitality concept to additional properties. Real estate developers approached me about partnership opportunities, and hospitality industry veterans expressed interest in advisory roles that could help accelerate growth beyond Seattle's market. Victoria's reaction to Moonrise Manor's early success was notably different from her response to Reed Events' initial momentum. She visited the venue during our third month of operations, ostensibly to see what I had accomplished with the historic property renovation, but clearly skeptical that a single successful venue represented sustainable business development. Her tour of Moonrise Manor was thorough and grudgingly impressive. Victoria acknowledged the quality of the renovation work and the sophistication of the operational systems, but questioned whether one venue could generate sufficient revenue to justify the investment and ongoing operational complexity. According to her analysis, venue ownership was fundamentally different from event planning services in ways that created new categories of risk and operational challenges. Property maintenance, insurance costs, and regulatory compliance would create ongoing expenses that could consume profits during slow periods or economic downturns. More importantly, Victoria viewed venue ownership as inherently limited by geographic constraints and local market conditions. Unlike service businesses that could potentially scale across multiple markets, hospitality properties were tied to specific locations and dependent on regional economic conditions that could change unpredictably. But I was already planning Moonrise, hospitality's expansion beyond the single Seattle property that Victoria saw as a limitation rather than a foundation for growth. The second venue acquisition came 18 months after Moonrise Manor's launch, when I purchased a waterfront property in Bellingham that had previously operated as a private yacht club. Harbor House offered completely different event capabilities from our Seattle location, with panoramic water views, marina access, and outdoor spaces that could accommodate larger gatherings and different event formats. The Bellingham acquisition was financed through a combination of Moonrise Manor's cash flow, additional SBA lending, and private investment from David Kim, who had become both a regular client and strategic advisor for Moonrise Hospitality's expansion plans. Harbor House required 6 months of renovation to meet commercial hospitality standards, but the investment was significantly smaller than Moonrise Manor had required because the property already possessed commercial zoning and basic infrastructure for food service and large group accommodations. The dual-venue model proved immediately successful, allowing Moonrise Hospitality to capture events that required different settings, capacities, and amenities while reducing dependence on any single property for revenue generation. Clients began booking multi-day celebrations that utilized both venues, and event planners started developing packages that showcased the diversity of experiences available within our portfolio. By the end of our second year, Moonrise Hospitality was operating 2 profitable venues, employed 23 people, and had generated over $800,000 in total revenue. Industry recognition was growing, with invitations to speak at hospitality conferences and requests for interviews about innovative approaches to venue development and operations. The third venue acquisition represented a quantum leap in scale and complexity. Moonrise Manor and Harbor House had been renovation projects that required significant investment, but operated within familiar market segments. The Olympic Lodge opportunity was different, a failed resort property that could be acquired for a fraction of its development cost, but would require massive capital investment and operational expertise to transform into a profitable hospitality business. The Olympic Lodge sat on 40 acres of forested land 90 minutes north of Seattle, with existing accommodations, meeting spaces, and recreational facilities that had been designed for corporate retreats and destination weddings. The previous owners had invested over $3 million in development before encountering financial difficulties that forced them into bankruptcy. The opportunity to acquire Olympic Lodge for $600,000 represented potential for establishing Moonrise Hospitality as a major player in the Pacific Northwest's destination hospitality market. But it also required expansion capabilities and capital resources that exceeded anything I had attempted during the company's first 2 years. Elena's advice about the Olympic Lodge acquisition was characteristically direct and challenging. She supported Moonrise Hospitality's growth trajectory and recognized the strategic value of adding destination accommodations to our venue portfolio, but she also emphasized the operational complexity and financial risks associated with managing a full-service resort property. The decision to proceed with Olympic Lodge required raising additional capital through private investors, expanding our management team to include hospitality professionals with resort experience, and developing operational capabilities that extended far beyond event coordination into accommodation services, food and beverage operations, and recreational activity management. The investment decision ultimately came down to whether I believed Moonrise Hospitality could scale successfully beyond boutique venues into comprehensive destination hospitality. The Olympic Lodge acquisition would establish us as a significant player in the region's hospitality market, but failure would potentially destroy everything we had built with our first 2 properties. Victoria's response to the Olympic Lodge proposal was immediate and unequivocal opposition. She viewed the acquisition as evidence that I was repeating the same pattern of overextension that had destroyed REIT events, pursuing opportunities beyond my capabilities and risking everything for ambitious growth that couldn't be sustained. According to her analysis, successful venue operators focused on perfecting their core competencies rather than diversifying into complex new market segments. Olympic Lodge would require skills and resources that Moonrise Hospitality hadn't demonstrated, creating potential for catastrophic failure that could eliminate the progress we had achieved over the previous 2 years. But I was no longer the inexperienced entrepreneur who had overcommitted to the Patterson project without understanding the operational requirements for success. 2 years of venue ownership had provided systematic education about hospitality development, financial management, and market analysis that informed every aspect of the Olympic Lodge evaluation. More importantly, Moonrise Hospitality had built a track record of successful property acquisition, renovation, and operations that provided a credible foundation for expansion into destination hospitality markets. The Olympic Lodge acquisition moved forward despite Victoria's objections, supported by investors who understood the strategic value and growth potential that the property represented for Moonrise Hospitality's long-term development. 6 months later, Victoria would discover that her sister's venue empire included the property where she had planned to hold her dream wedding. 3 years after acquiring Olympic Lodge, Moonrise Hospitality Group had become the Pacific Northwest's premier destination for luxury events and hospitality experiences. Our portfolio included 12 properties across Washington and Oregon, ranging from intimate urban venues to sprawling resort destinations that hosted everything from tech company retreats to celebrity weddings. The business had evolved far beyond my original vision of addressing gaps in Seattle's event venue market. We were now a comprehensive hospitality company with over 200 employees, partnerships with luxury brands, and recognition as one of the region's fastest-growing private companies. Forbes had featured me on their cover as a representative example of innovative entrepreneurship in the hospitality industry. But none of that prepared me for the phone call from Rebecca Chen on that Tuesday morning when Victoria attempted to have me banned from her own wedding. Victoria had been planning her wedding to Brandon Whitmore for 8 months, investing enormous time and financial resources into creating what she described as the social event of the season. Brandon was the heir to a software fortune and one of Seattle's most eligible bachelors, making their union a merger of prominent families that commanded attention from the city's business and social elite. The venue Victoria had chosen for her dream wedding was Moonrise Manor, the same historic property I had renovated 5 years earlier into my company's flagship location. She had put down a $50,000 deposit and signed a contract for a $300,000 celebration that would showcase her perfect taste and social connections. What Victoria had never bothered to research was who actually owned the property she was so desperate to book for the most important day of her life. The irony was almost too perfect to believe. Victoria, who had spent years dismissing my entrepreneurial capabilities and predicting my inevitable failure, had unknowingly chosen to hold her wedding at a venue I owned. The sister she considered an embarrassment to the family had built the business empire that controlled her dream wedding location. Rebecca's description of Victoria's phone call was both hilarious and heartbreaking. Victoria had contacted Moonrise Manor's event coordination team demanding to speak with the owner about permanently banning someone from the property. When asked who needed to be excluded, she had provided my name along with character assassinations describing me as unstable, unreliable, and prone to causing scenes at family events. Victoria had apparently assumed that throwing money around would solve any obstacle, including her own sister's presence at her wedding. She had insisted that financial compensation was no object and that the venue owner would certainly understand the need to protect such an important event from family drama. The silence that followed Rebecca's explanation of exactly who owned Moonrise Manor lasted nearly 30 seconds. Victoria had hung up without another word, presumably to process the impossible reality that her despised younger sister controlled the venue where she had planned to marry Seattle's most eligible bachelor. The decision to cancel Victoria's wedding contract didn't come from anger, though there was certainly plenty of that. It came from clarity about the fundamental difference between us that had been building for years. Victoria had made it clear that she considered my presence at her wedding to be an embarrassment that money could fix by simply keeping me away. She had forgotten that money had also built everything she wanted for her special day. The phone call I made to Victoria that afternoon was brief and professional. I informed her that Moonrise Manor was canceling her wedding contract effective immediately, that her deposit would be refunded within 7 business days, and that she would need to find an alternative venue for her Saturday ceremony. When Victoria demanded an explanation, I simply told her that the venue owner had decided her event wasn't a good fit for the property. The explosion that followed was everything I had expected and more. Victoria screamed about contracts and legal obligations, threatened lawsuits and public relations disasters, and demanded to speak with whoever was really in charge, because there was no way her little sister could have any actual authority over a venue of Moonrise Manor's caliber. When the reality finally sank in, that I wasn't joking, that I actually did own the property and had the legal right to cancel her contract, Victoria's tone shifted from outrage to desperation. She offered to double the fee, then triple it. She promised that I could attend the wedding with full VIP treatment and any accommodations I required. But the damage was already done. Victoria had revealed exactly how she saw me and what she thought I was worth. No amount of money or last-minute apologies could undo the fact that she had been perfectly willing to have me banned from her wedding rather than simply include me as her sister. The wedding was supposed to take place in 36 hours. Victoria and Brandon had sent invitations to 200 guests, including Seattle's business elite, political figures, and entertainment personalities. The logistics of canceling everything with less than 2 days' notice created a nightmare that extended far beyond the venue. Patricia Maximilian, the celebrity wedding planner Victoria had hired, called me directly within an hour of the cancellation. Her voice was barely controlled as she explained the impossibility of finding an alternative venue of comparable quality on such short notice. Did I understand the reputational damage this would cause to everyone involved? I listened to her concerns, with professional sympathy while making it clear that Moonrise Manor's decision was final and non-negotiable. The venue was no longer available for Victoria's event, and no amount of pleading or financial incentives would change that outcome. The media attention started almost immediately. Seattle's society columns had been anticipating Victoria and Brandon's wedding for months, describing it as the merger of two prominent families and a celebration that would set new standards for luxury events in the Pacific Northwest. When word spread that the wedding had been abruptly canceled due to a venue dispute, speculation ran wild about what could have possibly gone wrong. Victoria's friends began posting on social media about the situation, initially describing it as a cautionary tale about mixing business with family and the dangers of trusting people who weren't truly committed to your success. But there were other voices too. People who knew about Moonrise Hospitality's reputation and found it hard to believe that someone who had built a successful venue empire would arbitrarily destroy a family member's wedding without significant provocation. 1. Truth, as it slowly emerged through conversations and leaked details, was far more complex than either side initially presented. Victoria's attempts to have me banned from the wedding became public knowledge when several venue staff members confirmed the unusual security requests and the specific instructions about preventing my attendance. The wedding that was supposed to showcase Victoria's perfect life instead became a public relations disaster that exposed her character in ways she had never intended. The woman who had worried about being embarrassed by her sister's presence had created a scandal that dominated Seattle society gossip for weeks. Brandon's family, the Whitmores, who had initially been supportive of the union, began expressing private concerns about Victoria's judgment and her treatment of family members. The Whitmores had built their software fortune on platforms that brought people together, and the idea of deliberately excluding family from major life events contradicted their core values. The most significant impact was on Victoria herself. The confident, controlling woman who had planned every detail of her perfect wedding found herself scrambling to salvage not just an event, but her reputation and relationships. 3 days after the cancellation, Victoria appeared at my Moonrise Hospitality headquarters unannounced, demanding to speak with me privately. She had clearly been crying, and her usual professional composure was completely absent. For the first time since we were children, Victoria looked vulnerable and uncertain rather than commanding and confident. The conversation that followed in my office was unlike anything we had ever experienced as sisters. Victoria alternated between apologies and accusations, pleading for reconciliation and threatening revenge. She couldn't seem to decide whether she was more hurt by the wedding cancellation or amazed by the business empire I had built without her knowledge or acknowledgement. Through tears and frustration, Victoria admitted that she had never really understood what I was building with Moonrise Hospitality. She had assumed that my venue ownership was a small-scale local business, rather than the comprehensive hospitality empire that controlled 12 premium properties across the Pacific Northwest. The Forbes cover story that had featured me as one of America's most successful young entrepreneurs had never registered with Victoria as representing genuine achievement. She had dismissed it as publicity for a niche business, rather than recognition of significant accomplishment in a major industry. More painfully, Victoria acknowledged that she had never bothered to research Moonrise Manor's ownership because she couldn't conceive that her supposedly failed sister might control something she desperately wanted for her own wedding. The conversation revealed how completely Victoria had misunderstood both my capabilities and my character. She had genuinely believed that excluding me from her wedding was appropriate because she viewed my presence as potentially embarrassing to her social status and professional reputation. But she had also never considered that I might have the power to affect her wedding plans in any way. In Victoria's worldview, I was someone who needed to be managed and controlled, rather than someone who might control outcomes that mattered to her. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on either of us. Victoria had spent years predicting my entrepreneurial failure and encouraging me to accept conventional employment within established companies. Instead, I had built a business empire that employed hundreds of people and controlled venues where Seattle's elite celebrated their most important moments. Victoria had followed every conventional marker of success: prestigious education, corporate employment, social connections, and financial security. But when she wanted to host the most important event of her life, she had unknowingly chosen a venue owned by the sister she had written off as a business failure. The wedding never took place. Victoria and Brandon's relationship didn't survive. The scandal and public embarrassment of the canceled celebration. The stress of finding alternative arrangements on such short notice, combined with the negative media coverage and family tensions that emerged, created pressures that ultimately ended their engagement. Brandon, in particular, was troubled by Victoria's treatment of family members and her willingness to exclude her sister from such an important occasion. The Whitmore family values of inclusion and collaboration made Victoria's behavior incomprehensible and concerning for their potential future together. 6 months later, Victoria moved to New York to take a position with a prestigious consulting firm, essentially leaving Seattle and the social circle where her wedding cancellation had become legendary. The move represented both professional advancement and escape from the reputational damage that the failed wedding had created. Our relationship has remained distant but respectful since the wedding cancellation. Victoria sends brief congratulations when Moonrise Hospitality achieves new milestones or receives industry recognition, but we haven't had substantive conversations about family matters or business developments. The dynamic between us has fundamentally changed from what it was during my Reed Events failure and corporate employment years. Victoria is no longer the successful professional offering guidance to her struggling entrepreneur sister. I'm no longer the family disappointment seeking approval and validation from conventional achievement. We've become two professionals who happen to be sisters, with mutual respect for each other's accomplishments, but little common ground for deeper relationship building. The cancellation of Victoria's wedding wasn't revenge in any traditional sense. It was consequences for choices she had made about family relationships and personal values. Victoria had decided that excluding me from her wedding was appropriate and necessary. I had simply exercised my right as a business owner to decline serving a client whose values contradicted my own. But the broader lesson extends beyond family dynamics to questions about success, recognition, and the assumptions we make about other people's capabilities and worth. Victoria had spent years viewing my entrepreneurial pursuits through the lens of conventional career expectations, unable to recognize that innovation often requires different paths and different timelines than traditional professional advancement. Her prediction that I would never recover from Didn's failure had been spectacularly wrong. Not because she had misjudged my character, but because she had misunderstood the nature of entrepreneurial development. Business building isn't a talent that people either possess or lack. It's a skill set that can be developed through experience, including the hard lessons that only failure can provide. The Didn's collapse had been devastating, but it had also been education that informed every subsequent decision I made about building hospitality businesses. The Patterson project failure had taught me about operational scaling, vendor management, and financial planning in ways that no business school or corporate training program could have provided. Victoria's skepticism had also played a crucial role in motivating my success, forcing me to develop capabilities and determination that encouragement alone might never have generated. Sometimes the most valuable gift that family members can provide is honest doubt that pushes entrepreneurs to prove their worth through achievement rather than assumption. Today, Moonrise Hospitality Group continues expanding across the Western United States with properties in California, Nevada, and Colorado that serve clients ranging from tech entrepreneurs to entertainment celebrities. The company employs over 400 people and generates annual revenue exceeding $50 million. But the most satisfying aspect of our success isn't the financial metrics or industry recognition. It's the knowledge that we're creating experiences that mark the most important moments in people's lives, building spaces where families and communities come together for celebrations that become lifelong memories. Victoria's wedding would have been just another event in Moonrise Manor's calendar, forgotten within weeks by everyone except the couple whose special day we had helped create. Instead, it became a symbol of how assumptions about family relationships and personal worth can be shattered by success that nobody sees coming. Standing in Moonrise Manor's restored ballroom now, watching our team prepare for tonight's charity gala, I think about the journey from Didn's collapse to this moment of vindication and reflection. The empty ballroom where Victoria had planned to marry Brandon has been transformed into a space that will bring together people who understand the value of community support and collaborative achievement. The contrast with what Victoria had envisioned couldn't be more appropriate or satisfying. The phone still buzzes occasionally with messages from Victoria, but I don't respond anymore. The conversation we needed to have about family, respect, and recognition took place in my office 6 months ago when she realized that her sister's supposed embarrassment had become her own professional and personal nightmare. Some predictions are meant to be proven wrong. Victoria's assessment of my entrepreneurial recovery was one of them. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.